Hey, Maggie. So I have a question for you. Are you a visual or an auditory learner? You've heard like learning styles, like things like that. Are you
Yeah,
visual or auditory?
I would definitely say visual. I'm not like if I hear something, I will not retain it unless I also see it like written out or I write it out myself or there's a diagram or something.
Okay, we've all heard of this, right? Like that, like visual
Yeah.
learner, auditory learner, kinesthetic. So get this. Most of the stuff that we've heard about learning styles is basically like made up.
What do you mean made up?
Right? So it's so interesting. So research from 2008, they did a meta-analysis. So they studied like a bunch of different studies, found that there's no compelling evidence that matching how you teach to someone's learning style. So like if someone says I'm a visual learner and then you teach them as a visual learner, it actually doesn't make them learn any better than teaching them any other way. Isn't
Okay,
that crazy?
so there can still be a preference. The preference just doesn't correlate with actually learning more.
Exactly, exactly. So you may
That's wild.
prefer to see things written out, but if someone taught you without writing it out, you still would learn just as well. Isn't
That's
that
crazy because
wild?
that's like a standard, but
Totally,
it's
totally.
just
So
based
that's
on
what's
nothing.
and based on, yeah, I mean, based on like faulty, old evidence. So, like, and what's crazy is that 89% of teachers still believe in this. And like, it's still a thing. Like in schools, like a lot of schools develop, their lesson plans based on that or like IEPs and things like that. So it's kind of crazy that it's all based on like something that's basically not true. And we've known this for a while. 2008 was when the study came out. It just has not gotten to the back to the educators basically. So so
That's
today
crazy.
we want to talk about how this is important in how we think about struggling kids. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit in this episode, because parents might think, like, oh, well, if I match the learning style for my kid, like they'll do better. But we know from the research that it doesn't really make a difference. But what can make a difference is changing the structure and the environment of high school. And that can make a difference for a lot of kids who are struggling. So let's get into that. I'm Beth Callahan. I've spent about a decade working in the science of learning, and I've helped build a couple of universities along the way. And I'm joined by,
Maggie Hagen. Hi, I work with her on curriculum and pedagogy and just bringing kind of like a scientific rigor to the things we do.
indeed, Maggie is a scientist. She's actually a biologist by trade, but she brings a genuinely scientific level of rigor to everything that we do. So today, we're going to investigate a common pattern: kids who are clearly smart and capable, but they kind of fall apart in high school. And the story that we get told is often always that something's wrong with the kid. But today, we're going to push back on that a little bit. So we want to start by talking about where the current high school structure came from. Like, why are high schools designed the way that they are?
Okay.
And they're mostly designed based on a 19th century model where, what we were trying to do was design basically compliant workers. So we had standardized tests and age cohorts, and we were trying to like get everybody on the same page and make sure everybody could basically work in the industrial society that we had built. We weren't really thinking about creating curious, self-directed thinkers. Like that was not a big thing in the 19th century. So
Yeah.
it was in 1906 that the Carnegie Unit was developed. And we've probably all heard, like, when you go to college and it's like, oh, this class is 4 units or this class is
hmm
2 units. And we think about those standardized, like, oh, a 4 unit class meets like either for an hour 3 times a week, or it meets 2 times a week for like an hour and 20 minutes or whatever. We're probably really familiar with that idea of like units kind of equating to seat time. So, what the Carnegie Unit was designed to do was, first of all, to kind of standardize across all different schools. So you knew that if someone went to this school versus this school, they were pretty much getting the same thing. But what it was based on was what we call seat time. So it was based all on the amount of time that a student was sitting in a seat studying a subject, but not by like whether or not they'd actually learned that subject or how quickly it took them to learn it. So it just kind of assumed like, oh, well, if you study this for an hour, we'll just assume that you learned that. And that's how they based the units that we're still using today. And they did that back in 1906. So
There's been so many advancements in like what we know about education, what we know about learning styles. There's like so much more technology that's used in classrooms. There's more electives. There's the integration of social emotional learning, stuff like that. But like you're saying that the core architecture of the classroom has stayed the same since the 19th century, despite
Yeah.
all the advancements we've made, and despite the fact that the foundation of it is arbitrary.
Totally, totally. It's kind of crazy. And the problem is that a lot of smart, curious kids often really like feel that difficulty. We know there's lots of kids who are like, how many times have we heard of busy work,
Mm,
right? That's what happens when you have time to fill, but don't necessarily know what you're going to fill. Like if someone learns the material in less time than they're sitting in the classroom, the teacher can't just let them go. They have to
right.
create something else for them to do. So that history of why and how high schools got created is sort of the foundation for what we're going to talk about, and things that are happening today. So we've heard a lot about like the teen mental health crisis, particularly in the past, like, 5 to 10 years. And it's true that teen anxiety and school avoidance are at historic highs. The percentage of high school students reporting persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness grew from 30% of students, which already is kind of insanely high,
Yeah.
in 2013 to 40% in 2023. So within 10 years, it grew 10%. And it peaked in 2021 at 42%. And that's according to the CDC Youth Risk Behavior Survey. So it's definitely an issue. And the story is that it's a mental health crisis in kids. And that's real. That's real. Social media and the pandemic, there's like lots of reasons that kids are struggling, but there's also a compelling additional explanation. And we're often seeing what that explanation is that we're often seeing a rational response from kids to an environment that just doesn't suit them, this high school
Mm,
environment that doesn't really suit them. So there's two kind of patterns that demonstrate that the environment is the thing that can be contributing to these kids struggling. So one of them is something they call the coasting collapse, which I saw a lot
okay.
when I was teaching in college, where kids basically are very successful in school for a long time. And then they hit a point at which they need to work harder and they kind of collapse because they've never had to work hard before.
Mm,
So this happens to a lot of kids, like when they get to college, where they were like the number one kid in the class, right? And they didn't really have to work for it. And then they get to college and they've been funneled with all the number one kids in the class. And so then they're like, oh, I have to study now. Like something must be wrong with me, you know?
yeah, that resonates with me for sure. I don't want to say that like I didn't have to work in school, in high school and grade school and stuff, but I did like I knew how much work I needed to put in and I put in that much work and it like worked out for me. And I do remember when I got to college, my chemistry class, it was like no matter
It's
how much
always
I
the chemistry
studied, it
class.
didn't seem like it, and I was so like I had no idea how to confront that. I feel like even to this day, if I don't pick up on something really easily, I'm just like, not for me. Like, I
Yeah,
don't
no,
have any like
it's
resilience in how to overcome that it didn't come easy to me thing.
totally, totally. Yeah, it's a big thing. I mean, it happened to me too. Like I was also like a really good compliant kid and did very well in high school and everything. And I remember specifically when I got to college and I had a class, an English class, where I like literally was trying to write this paper and I just could not figure it. I remember calling my parents crying and just being like, I can't do it. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Like I had no like resources. I hadn't really been taught, the
Mm,
resources for how to overcome that kind of that struggle, and to know that that struggle was real. So that's kind of one pattern, that where the environment has not taught these kids how to, and they're smart kids, how to deal with like those struggles. But then there's the
yeah.
differently wired kid.
Mm,
So, what we often, I think, we hear a lot about neurodivergence now. So, we think about neurodivergent kids, and there's lots of versions of that. But one of the most common is ADHD.
mm,
And ADHD brains, the way they engage suggests that traditional school is like maybe the worst possible environment for them. So, there is a researcher who has done a lot of studies on these differently, he's kind of an expert on ADHD, Dr. William Dodson. And so what he's
mm,
discovered is that what ADHD brains need is four things: a genuine interest in the topic, novelty, a sense of challenge or competition, and then urgency from personally meaningful stakes. So, of all four of those, the one that maybe traditional high school gives you is like deadlines, because yeah, you have deadlines. You have to turn in papers, you have a test on this day or whatever. But for many ADHD students, the deadlines don't trigger the urgency response because they're not connected to anything the student personally cares about. So, like,
Mm.
they might not necessarily care about the grades or the subject or the topic. And so those deadlines are kind of arbitrary to them. So when we then think about the other three elements, they are not really great in the traditional high school. So genuine interest, curriculum is designed by curriculum design. It's designed by the
Yeah.
core standards and everything. But even more importantly, it's taught the same to every kid. So
Mm.
you have a classroom of 30 kids, like you might be able to engage each of those kids and get them interested in, say, history by dealing with like what that kid's personal interests are and approaching it from that direction. But you can't do that if you're a teacher and you have 30 students and you've got to get
Yeah.
through all this curriculum. So, genuine interest is not something that you can trigger in every kid in a traditional high school. And
Mm.
then novelty, like schools are based on routine. They're not really based on novelty, right? So it's the same subjects, the same format, the same schedule, the same classroom for 4 years. So ADHD brains habituate quickly and then they need new input to stay engaged, which is often why you see like kind of ADHD brain kids acting out or like trying to create some kind of novelty for themselves in the classroom. And then challenge, the work in classrooms has to be paced to like the middle of the road, right? Because, and then that means there are going to be some students who are farther ahead and some students who need more help. Um, so those students kind of get left behind. Like a bright ADHD student is going to like either be bored or they're going to be overwhelmed, like the ADHD students who need more support, and they'll like check out, and then the gap is too big, and they're just like, forget it. Like nothing produces the right kind of engagement and challenge when everything is targeted to like the middle of the road.
That makes a lot of sense. This part reminds me of my brother a lot. He has ADHD, and as a student, he was always considered a bad student. He's smarter than me. He always
Mm,
tested better than me on like standardized testing and things like that. And if you meet him, it doesn't take you long to like recognize that he's a very smart person. He went to
right.
a gifted school that I didn't even get into. I tested and like I didn't make it in there, but overall he was like a B, C student and I was getting straight A's, and it was just
Yeah.
like it was confusing for sure to my parents and to his teachers and stuff. They
What was his
medicated
like?
him.
Oh,
They
okay. So
medicated him and then they
what was he?
expected
Was he
that
diagnosed with something?
he was diagnosed with ADHD,
ADHD.
and
Okay.
they medicated him, and then I think that they thought like, well, now we treated the thing, and so you should be able to do this. And it was like,
Yeah.
no, that's still the system is still not teaching to his brain the way that his brain
Yeah.
needs to learn. So yeah,
Totally. And
he always thought he was a bad student. He didn't have a good work ethic.
uh,
He wasn't motivated enough, and he
that's the
wasn't, but
worst.
it wasn't because of him.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it wasn't his fault. But that's what we're teaching these kids is that when we say it's like, a mental health crisis in kids, or it's like, oh, we talk about needing to fix the kid when a lot
Mm.
of times that's not what needs to be fixed, especially when we see this long history of like the way we just assume like, okay, this is how school is, but it was designed for a certain reason and in a certain way that's not necessarily built for every kid and every kid in today's society either. So it's like so sad when you have, someone like your brother
Right.
who is basically like has been taught that they're the problem.
I do want
Yeah.
to push back a little bit. I know that, like, so I understand, I get how a mismatch between school structure and the way that a student learns would be stressful. I know,
Yeah.
especially with my brother, I personally know, but I know a lot of people, there's other sources of anxiety as well. There's like social
Yeah.
anxiety. You're a teenager, your hormones are doing crazy things. Like, how do you, is it like feel a little reductive to blame the system for the teen
Yeah.
mental health crisis?
Yeah, for sure. It's like, and that's true. There are definitely other things contributing to the mental health crisis in students, like for sure, social media, the pandemic, like a
Mm.
lot of those things are contributing. And there's, family stress and things like that. but there's a specific pattern that kind of helps us identify whether or not the school environment is a major contributing factor too. And that's the like school related anxiety. So a lot of times it's that Sunday night stress of like, oh, I've got to go to school tomorrow morning. It's like stomach aches in the morning at school. Like I remember one of my son's friends was every morning that he would get up to go to school, he would throw up because he was like so stressed about it. And on Saturday and Sunday, he wasn't throwing up. Like it was only those
Oh,
mornings when I know, isn't that so sad?
buddy.
This was in elementary school too, poor buddy.
No.
And then also like sometimes that anxieties, those symptoms like disappear on the weekends or over the summer. Like over the summer, those kids are not necessarily as, and we might think like, oh, well, yeah, school is, it's hard and you have like, more responsibilities when you're in school, but it sometimes is deeper than that. It's that
Mm.
not just that you have stuff to do, but the stuff that you have to do in school is not matched with the way that your brain wants to work. And so that causes like this extra anxiety. So it's not that it's always the system or only the system, it's that the system is more implicated than we necessarily can acknowledge sometimes. Yeah. And that there are other, maybe other options.
Okay, what about the fact that if these kids grow up and go into like corporate jobs or whatever, like sitting still and doing work that you are not particularly interested in and like listening to someone talk and like having to retain that information and like some of these things are skills that they're going to have to learn. Like what's the
Yeah.
risk of curating the environment so much that the students don't learn how to persist when they're in situations where they're just gonna
Yeah.
have to make it work.
That's a huge thing. And there's definitely a need for like a grit and a resilience. And like I've always been, when I was teaching high school and was teaching college, I've been of the mindset that like some educators are like, we need to entertain these kids. I'm like, well, we don't necessarily need to, like, they do need to develop some skills. There is a little kernel of truth in that develop a compliant worker thing. Like, you do need
Mm,
to train people to be able to hold a job and show up on time and all those kinds of things. But there's a difference between developing grit, where you like build genuine resilience and the ability to like sit through a super boring meeting and take the notes and do the work that you're supposed to do, and learned helplessness, which we'll talk about in some later episodes, which is when a kid can't influence their environment no matter what they do. So you might think like, just keep powering through, keep powering through. But when the environment is not matched to the way their brain works, it doesn't matter how much they power through, it's still not going to work for them. And so
mm,
that just teaches them that, like, well, no matter how hard I try, I can't make it work for me. Like your brother, right? Your
yeah.
brother was like, basically, they're like, power through, take this drug, and then you'll be fine. Like, just grit through it. And they're like, it didn't work for him. And then what did he learn? He learned like, oh, I can't do anything. I'm a bad student.
Mm,
So that's sad too.
yeah.
Um, so I think what's important is to understand what the signs are that maybe your student is a victim, so to speak, of the environment, right? Where maybe
Mm,
there's a sign that your student is could do better in a different environment. And so we want to talk a little bit about what those signs might be.
okay.
So one of them would be the kid who's like smart at home but shut down at school.
Mm,
So like you might have like the over dinner conversation, they might be able to have a whole conversation about like Roman history or like something that's
mm,
interesting and engaging to them. But once they get into school, they just are like writing one word answers on assignments or just not even really engaging. Like that kind of kid who has that sort of mismatched behavior where they're like behaving one way in one environment and another way in
yeah.
another environment can be a good indication that maybe if you get them into a different environment, they'd be more successful.
Okay, so like when I was a kid, like one of the things that I would do, I think like a way that I like kind of made school work for me is if I was interested in something we talk about, I would go home and like do my own research on what that thing was and like learn about it a lot on my own. And I feel like I did a lot more of my learning outside of the classroom
Yeah.
than in class. I had a hard time locking in on whatever the teacher was talking about, even when it was
Right.
something that I was interested about, that I would like obviously I was interested because I'd go look it up later.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Totally. So
That
you were, yeah, yeah, it's like you were engaging in you were building those associations yourself. Like you were finding the part of that topic that interests you that would get you like motivated to keep going, which, ideally all teachers would be able to meet each student at that level
mm,
and build that for them. You just happened to be the kind of student who was able to do that on your own, but a lot of students aren't.
mm,
So, yeah, students who are excited about specific topics and like will do research on their own, like that is an indication that they're capable of
right.
having that motivation, right? But that, like, if they're disengaged in class, it doesn't necessarily say anything about their actual capability and their ability to like learn and go on to do like amazing things.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's definitely another indication of a kid.
I think also of like my brother who like got poor grades, but like on tests, like it was clear that he was smart. I think that that was like frustrating for him, but also like frustrating
Yeah.
for his teachers and my parents and stuff to be like, clearly you are capable, clearly you are smart and you know this stuff, so why aren't you showing that in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So when the grades are not reflecting like what clearly is like a demonstrated intelligence or a demonstrated capability, that can be another major indicator and can be so frustrating for the student because so often it gets blamed on the student. Like you're just not trying hard enough. We know you can do this. You're just not showing your full potential, yada
Yeah.
yada. Like then the kid gets blamed and like then they just shut down, right?
Mm.
And as I mentioned before, like those physical symptoms, those anxiety symptoms, like around school, can be another indicator that, and especially if those symptoms lift on like weekends or holidays or over the summer, we talked about how there's definitely other things contributing to the mental health crisis that kids are having. But when those symptoms ease, like over the summer, like social media is still there over the summer,
Mm.
right? But school's not. And so that can be an indicator, like when those symptoms are really specifically heightened around school, that it's the structure of the environment that they're in that's causing an issue versus like all these other things that are contributing. So, and then oftentimes we get, and this kind of goes back to your brother as well, like every year different teachers or different subjects, the same thing, like, oh, this kid isn't working up to their potential, I know they can do better. Like when that's kind of a continual like repeated thing,
Yeah.
then yeah, then that's another indication.
Yeah, I will say, like, I went to the same school for first grade through eighth grade, and my brother, I think, went to three different schools over that time because my parents kept trying to like find a
Oh,
environment that like was a better fit for him, but they were all, one of them was a gifted school, which like I think was better in some ways, but then I think like they moved faster, but yeah, they've got a
the
classroom of gifted
structure.
students, so they're moving faster, but they're still not personalizing that to each student and their
Exactly.
needs.
And it's
That's
still
really
structured the
interesting.
same way around the seat
Yeah,
time and just structured like, they still have a classroom, even if they're all gifted students, like it might be a slightly narrower window, but there's still going to be kids on the ends. And it's still
absolutely.
not necessarily engaging those kids in what like interests them, like getting them to be interested in what the topics are.
Mm,
So it's also a pattern, right? So sometimes all teenagers are going to have like rough weeks. Like there's a lot of stuff going on where, maybe something happened on social media or with their friends. Like I remember my younger son in particular was like there's a lot of like drama around like the friend group and stuff. And so
yeah.
you could tell like there were some weeks where it was just like really rough. But kids who are in the wrong fit have rough years. Like it's
Mm,
always kind of a struggle and the symptoms are often school specific. like that. So it's that pattern of like with your brother, right? Like he
Mm.
went to different schools, but yet it was always the same story. So it's that kind of pattern of like it's always the same thing that makes you realize that these students are not like the environment is not serving them, not serving
Yeah,
them at
I'm
all.
just thinking just now as we talk about it, like my parents, I do remember them like thinking like, oh, it's this friend group that he has that's the problem. And my
Right?
brother is still great friends with those guys now. Like I
Yep.
don't I don't think they were the problem, but it was like a, well, he's smart, so it can't be the school part.
Right.
I
Totally.
do think
Because
it's
we
just like
just,
people don't even think of it
yeah.
as
Yeah. Because it's like, it's sort of that thing, where like the last the last person to know about the water is the fish, right?
Mhm.
Like it's so ubiquitous, and we've all gone through this system. Like it's just there, and we just assume that that's like there for a reason, and that's the way it is. And we don't think about the fact that like there might be other options.
I do
So the
think
system,
that,
yeah, go ahead.
well, just the system does like work for a lot of, like, even if it's kids aren't flourishing necessarily, a lot of kids
Yeah,
figure out how to make it work, and some kids do flourish in that system. So like
yeah,
we I think that that can be like misleading for the students that are struggling, because it's like, well,
yeah.
this works for everybody else, but also like how do we keep the parts of the system that work? Would those students also benefit from a different structure
It's a
or
good question. It's a good question because I definitely was one of those kids who flourished in that environment. Like I was always compliant, I'm a rule follower, so like it was not a problem for me. And but I and so for those kids like maybe it's fine and maybe you're learning, and there's an extent to which we kind of assume that students are going to learn stuff kind of by osmosis through, you're going to learn how to meet deadlines and things like that just because we're like putting you through deadlines, and for some kids that actually works, but for other kids it doesn't necessarily work. So the environment is working for some kids, and that's fine for those kids, and they can like stay in that environment. But for other kids I think they need to change. So the system's not broken for everybody. It's just
Mm,
it wasn't ever designed for every kid, and for all the different, like especially now with all we know about differences in how kids learn, what we know now about learning and memory and how
mm,
people learn in general, but then also neurodivergence and things like that. So if your kid is in a system that wasn't built for them, that's important information to realize, and that allows you then to take some action.
mm,
So, yeah. So, next episode, we're going to get more specific about what's actually happening with these kids, because the most common explanation for a struggling student is also one of the least useful ones. It's that your kid is lazy.
mm,
And so we're going to talk about that more in the next episode. It turns out that your kid is lazy is not really an explanation at all. It just sounds
mm,
like one.
mm.
So if any of this resonated, come find us at collegeonramps.org. And if you're interested in the studies behind the data that we've cited, all the references are in the show notes. And finally, if you know a parent who needs to hear this, send it to them. That's the most useful thing that you can do. So we'll see you in the next episode of High School Wasn't Built for Every Kid.